joining us today. We will start in about 5 minutes. Good morning. I'm Susan Booth, and welcome to the National Safety Council Nebraska Chapter Celebration of Safety. Although we're coming to you virtually today, we're so excited that we're able to get together to honor those companies who are committed to safety and sending their employees home safely every day. While we're in this new normal, and we aren't able to share a handshake and break bread, I'd just like to personally say that I'm missing you all today. It's extremely awkward to be sitting here just talking to a camera, but I am hopeful that you will enjoy today, enjoy our speaker, and be inspired to continue your quest towards zero fatalities and zero incidents. So let's get started. As is tradition, I'd like to launch our event today with the national anthem and take a moment to remember those who have lost their lives and those who have served our great country. Please remove your hats and feel free to stand. Thank you again to all of our current and retired military. Our mission at the National Safety Council is to reduce injuries and save lives. And like all of you, we know that can't happen if you take shortcuts. It's our responsibility to continue to be diligent in our mission. We thank all of you for maintaining that focus. It will take all of us driving the message to not take shortcuts towards the road to zero, because there's no one that someone won't miss. I'd ask for a moment of silence as we remember those who have lost their lives in workplace fatalities. Well, normally I would just go ahead and tell you to enjoy your lunch, but I guess today I'm just going to jump right into the presentation. It's now my pleasure, my honor, to introduce my friend, Eric Keppie. Eric is the National Safety Council Nebraska President and CEO. Eric?
On behalf of the Board of Directors and the Council staff, I would like to welcome all of you to the 2020 Celebration of Safety. We are pleased to honor so many companies that have achieved excellence in safety this past year. I'd like to start by taking this opportunity to recognize the National Safety Council Nebraska Chapter Board of Directors. I am proud to be able to work alongside such a committed group. Your support and guidance is critical to the success of our organization. Thank you for your time and guidance. I would also like to thank all of our corporate sponsors: AAA Nebraska, AT&T, Warner Distribution, Lockton, Velmont, Nebraska Medicine, MMC Contractors, Ortho Nebraska, First National Bank of Omaha, Nebraska Department of Transportation, State Farm Insurance, JBS Omaha, Nutrien, Airlight Plastics, Conductix Wampler, Children's Hospital, Warner Enterprises, Miller Electric, Kiewit, Jensen Tire, Travelers, Omaha Steaks, Quinn Insurance, Lamar's Insurance, Danielson Incorporated, ConAgra Brands, G&H Extreme, Motorist Insurance Group, Arctic Insulation, 3M, Walmart, Farm Credit Services of America, Millard Family Chiropractic, Premier Dental. Thank you again for your support. I also want to recognize the Safety Council staff. This group of exceptional individuals work tirelessly every day for the safety of all Nebraskans. Thank you for your dedication and what you've done to organize and deliver this great event. These past few months have been a challenge for all organizations, including the National Safety Council. But we have also seen some positives come from this pandemic. We have witnessed companies and individuals working together to stay safe. As an organization, we have worked very hard to continue to provide the resources you need as well. Our team, as well as the National Safety Council, developed and held a multitude of webinars, checklists, and other documentation that I hope you have accessed. We also partnered with the Nebraska, Lincoln, Kearney, and Omaha Chambers of Commerce organizations to release a program called Be Safe Nebraska. The pledge program is developed to increase the confidence for employees, partners, and vendors. We sincerely hope that you have completed the pledge. Now, let's give out some awards. As a Nebraska nonprofit since 1924, our members are the backbone of our organization, and we are truly thankful and humbled by the longevity of some of our members, as well as their commitment to our organization and our mission. To all of you that we honor today for your specific anniversary, and really to all of our members, we say thank you for your support. Our membership represents companies small and large, all across Nebraska, representing the medical industry, agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation, truly all industries. Today, I am honored to recognize some of Nebraska Chapter's Safety Champion members who have reached a milestone in their membership. I'd like to personally say thank you for supporting our organization, as well as the safety of your employees. The 50-year champion is Blair Community Schools. The 30-year champions are the following members. The 20-year champions are the following members. The 10-year champions are the following members. The 5-year champions are the following members.
Thank you, National Safety Council. We're safer together.
Safer together.
Safer together.
Woohoo!
A very special thank you to all our members. As a nonprofit organization, we appreciate your support so that we may continue our mission of reducing injuries and saving the lives of Nebraskans. And now, it is my honor to recognize those companies that have implemented injury and illness prevention programs, established safety committees, and conduct employee training and other safety initiatives designed to meet their unique safety needs. The results of these efforts and the challenges in obtaining success may have seemed overwhelming at times, but these companies have succeeded, and they are realizing reduced injuries and illnesses, improved employee relations, and reduced workers' compensation costs. Now, let's take a look at the 2020
Safe together. Working together will make the difference, the safe difference. As safety professionals, safety committee members, and company leaders, we know developing a safe work environment isn't a one-day event. It's a long-term commitment. It's a commitment to each other. It's a commitment to staying safe together. As we know, we can achieve our safety goal through education, training, and being an advocate for safe practices throughout our organizations. Congratulations to all of the organizations who have been named a Nebraska's Safest Company, and thank you to our safety champions whose membership longevity with the National Safety Council, Nebraska chapter, continues to help support our mission. Together, we are stronger. Together, we are safer. Together, we are safety without shortcuts. Join us now as we honor Nebraska's Safest Companies 2020. The following companies are honored as Nebraska's Safest Companies with distinction. These organizations have an exemplary safety record that is more than 50% better than national average compared to their industry classification and have implemented comprehensive safety programs. Congratulations to all of the Nebraska's Safest Companies with distinction award recipients. Kiewit Corporation, 31 years. Northern Natural Gas Company, 31 years. 55th Wing Offutt Air Force Base, 29 years. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Omaha District, 29 years. Cargill, Blair, 25 years. Nutrien, 25 years. Union Pacific Railroad, 24 years. Warren Distribution, 23 years. The Alliance Group, 21 years. Peraton, 20 years. HDR, 19 years. Nebraska Public Power District, 19 years. Omaha Public Power District, 19 years. Omaha Steaks International, 19 years. Train, 19 years. G4S Secure Integration, 18 years. Children's Hospital and Medical Center, 17 years. NatureWorks, 17 years. CNW Services, 16 years. Flint Hills Resources, 15 years. Physicians Mutual, 15 years. 3M Valley, 13 years. GSI Omaha, 13 years. Merck Animal Health, Omaha, 13 years. Nebraska Furniture Mart, 13 years. Nucor Steel, Nebraska, 13 years. The Whites Company, 11 years. Darland Construction, 10 years. Ortho Nebraska Hospital, 10 years. Leader Construction, 8 years. Methodist Health System, 8 years. Fibro Animal Health, F Street, 8 years. Ameritech Services, 7 years.
Ameritech Service, keeping essential workers safe to provide laundry services to hospitals from Grand Island to Des Moines.
Conductix Wampfler, 7 years. Valmont Irrigation, McCook, 7 years. William H. Harvey Company, 7 years. Cardinal Health, 6 years. Eldorado Packaging, 6 years. Engineering, Automation and Design, 6 years. New Star Energy, 6 years. Syngenta Seeds, 6 years. CSG International, 5 years. Danielson Incorporated, 5 years. CCS Group, 4 years. IES Commercial Incorporated, 4 years. Lala US, 4 years. Valmont Columbus, 4 years. Valmont Industries, West Point Galvanizing, 4 years. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Nebraska, 3 years. Boyd Jones, 3 years. Davis Erection, 3 years. Norfolk Iron and Metal, 3 years. BD Pharmaceutical Systems, 2 years. Continental Fire Sprinkler Company, 2 years. Hub Group LLC, 2 years. Rinsler Group LLC, 2 years. Brace Integrated Services, 1 year. ENK of Omaha, 1 year. Evonik, 1 year. Congratulations to Nebraska's safest companies with distinction. The following companies are honored today as Nebraska's safest companies. These organizations' safety record is better than national average compared to their industry classification and have implemented extensive safety programs. Congratulations, Nebraska's Safest Companies Award winners. OSI Oakland, 24 years. Mary Lanning Healthcare, 21 years. Quality Living Incorporated, 21 years. Emmanuel, 20 years. JBS Omaha, 20 years. Chemico LLC, 18 years. Syngenta Crop Protection, 17 years. Valmont Industries, Valley, 15 years. Sparkling Clean Service Incorporated, 14 years. Lyman Ritchie Corporation, 13 years. MMC Contractors, 13 years. Nebraska Medicine, 13 years. Oriental Trading Company Incorporated, 12 years. Papio Missouri River Natural Resources District, 12 years. Seedorf Masonry, 12 years. Metropolitan Utilities District, Water, 11 years. University of Nebraska Medical Center, 11 years. CHI Health Mercy Corning, 10 years. Quality Pork International, 10 years. Metropolitan Community College, 8 years. Schneider Electric, 8 years. Enterprise Precast Concrete, 7 years. Novozymes, 6 years. Zoetis, 6 years. Lincoln Electric System, 5 years. Corbion, 4 years. Jeff McTaggart Masonry, 4 years. Midlands Mechanical, 4 years. Elman Print, 3 years. Mapes Canopies, 3 years. Monogram Foods, 3 years. Outlook Nebraska, 3 years. Plastilite Corporation, 3 years. Rasmussen Mechanical Services, 3 years. Scott Enterprises, 3 years. Majors Plastics, 2 years. Miller Electric, 2 years. Plumrose USA, 2 years. Thermal Heating, Air and Plumbing, 2 years. Valmont Valley Structures, 2 years. Cardinal Health, Omaha, 1 year. CDM Service Group, 1 year. Crete Carrier, 1 year. MCL Construction, 1 year. Molex, West Upland, 1 year. Ortho Nebraska Clinics, 1 year. Oxbow Animal Health, 1 year.
Oxbow is proud to be one of Nebraska's safest companies. Every day we strive to be
Safe together!
Fibro Animal Health, G Street, 1 year. Renke Manufacturing Company, 1 year. Salon Centric, 1 year. Technical Support Incorporated, 1 year. Congratulations to Nebraska's safest companies. We are proud of all of the Nebraska companies that are committed to helping us execute our mission, reducing injuries and saving lives. To you, we say congratulations on contributing to a safer Nebraska.
Congratulations again to all of the Nebraska's safest companies. On a personal note, I'm very proud to work with all of you and thankful for those companies that allowed me to visit their locations and shoot that video. Thank you to Creek Carrier, MMC Contractors, and JBS Omaha. I had a blast at your location, and your teams were very fun to work with. You might have also recognized some video from past years. Thanks again to our friends at CSG, Valmont, Lincoln Electric, and Rikes Equipment. I'd also like to thank all of those companies that took the time to send in your videos and your pictures. It was fun to get those, and some of them were very, very creative. Good job. I'd also like to give a shout out to our marketing manager, Nicole. Nicole Sassy, she put that video together. You did a great job, Nicole. Thank you. Please join me one more time in recognizing all of the companies that are represented here today and say thank you to all of you for your commitment to safety and for your continuing focus on safety without shortcuts. I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker today. Alan Mallory is passionate about leadership and about reaching new heights. His unique philosophy of life revolves around empowering people and embracing an agile mentality focused on goals and relationships. But I'm not going to steal Alan's thunder. I'm going to let him share his story directly with you. Alan?
Thank you, Susan. It's a pleasure to be part of this celebration of safety and to be here virtually with all of you. A big congratulations to the recipients of Nebraska's Safest Companies. The presentation I have for you today is built around my family's expedition on Mount Everest. And as you'll see, this is a very risky and dangerous expedition, but I'm going to be highlighting some of the ways that we were able to mitigate those risks and really keep it as safe as possible. So climbing to the top of the world had been a dream of my family's for many years. Each of the 5 members of my family had climbed one or more of the world's 7 summits, which are the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents, in order to prepare for Everest, and we decided to tackle Everest together as a family. So this is my sister Laura on the left, my brother Adam, my mother Barbara, my father Daniel, and of course myself. We are a very adventuresome family, and we love the outdoors. There was a huge amount of preparation involved for a trip of this magnitude, and it was a logistical nightmare trying to put it all together. This is a photo of just a portion of my personal gear, and there's an incredible amount of very expensive, very specialized equipment needed. On April 5th of 2008, we flew out of Toronto Pearson Airport and eventually arrived in Kathmandu, Nepal. Kathmandu is a very old and very poor city. It's a beautiful city in many ways, but there are millions of people all living in a very small area. So it's extremely congested, peddlers everywhere you look trying to sell their wares just to make a living. They have quite an electrical disaster there. It wasn't uncommon to see wiring hung like this, and they didn't produce enough electricity to power the city while we were there. So throughout the days we'd get these rolling blackouts, which took a little bit of getting used to. We spent a few days in Kathmandu purchasing some of the equipment we hadn't brought with us from North America before taking another smaller flight to a little village called Lukla at the base of the Himalayan mountains. And Lukla really acts as a starting point for anyone climbing on or around Mount Everest on the south side. It was quite an exciting flight through the Himalayan foothills, and we landed on what must be the shortest runway in the entire world. It's this upward sloping runway with a 2,000-foot cliff at the one end. When we arrived at Lukla, we had a huge number of bags. It takes 2 months to climb Mount Everest, so there's an incredible amount of equipment and supplies needed for this very long period of time. And generally, these heavy bags are brought into base camp by yaks. It's a 10-day trek into base camp, and we see a lot of these long yak trains along the way carrying equipment and supplies in and out of base camp. The route from Lukla actually follows the Khumbu Valley that you see here. There's a rushing glacial melt river at the base of the valley, and the route is actually carved into the side of the valley in many places. After about 4 or 5 days, we finally arrived at a little village called Namche Bazaar. And Namche is a very picturesque village built in the saddle of this mountain. And we spent a few days at Namche because at this altitude we really needed to start to acclimatize. As you move higher up on the mountain, the air becomes thinner with less available oxygen. And you need to give your body time to adapt to these new conditions. Now what your body's doing is it's creating more red blood cells. Your red blood cells, of course, have the hemoglobin, which carries the oxygen molecule. So the most important thing at this altitude is to not go up too fast. If you do go up too fast, you run the risk of getting acute mountain sickness, which is where your small blood vessels will constrict and rupture. This leads to pulmonary edema, where the blood leaks into your lungs and will suffocate you, or cerebral edema, where the blood leaks into your brain, can cause you to go blind, and if you don't get down very quickly, it will kill you. And we saw climbers there with both of these edemas. So acclimatization is extremely important. We really had to maintain this future mindset. And the reason why this is so important is because everyone's shooting for a 2-week weather window at the end of May, which is one of the only times you can reach the summit. Most of the year, the summit is in the jet stream. And so like a typical project or endeavor you might be involved with, we have a fixed end date. And we're working back 2 months from that fixed end date to the start of our execution, the actual climbing, and then 2 years from that point back to the start of our planning. And if we miss anything in that whole process, we might as well pack up and head home because we're going to miss that 2-week weather window at the end of May. So you can see why you need this future mindset years before you even set out to attempt something like this. This is just a quick look at our work breakdown structure. If we break it into financial, time, medical knowledge, and support, I won't go through them all, but you can see the many different activities that we had to get through. At about 14,000 vertical feet, we came to a little village called Periche, and this is the first time we met up with my mother. My mother had flown over earlier than the rest of us because she thought she needed a little bit extra time to acclimatize. She'd made it to base camp and was attempting to climb another smaller peak called Island Peak for acclimatization reasons when she unfortunately fell and tore her Achilles tendon and part of her calf. So she had to abandon her climb. We got to spend 1 day with my mother here at Periche before she started down and we continued up. It really was quite a difficult time for her climbing out from that very high altitude with this serious injury. And she was all by herself except for one porter who knew 2 words in English, up and no up. And so it was more of an emotional journey for her more than anything. She flew back to North America to get medical attention. Her entire family's on the mountain, and as you'll see in a little while, it's quite a risky endeavor in certain areas. We got our first snowstorm at Periche during the night, which left us with some really interesting scenery in the morning. As we get closer to base camp, the trail becomes a little less discernible, and eventually after 10 days of climbing, we finally arrive at base camp at about 17,500 vertical feet in elevation. The tents at base camp are built every year right on top of the Khumbu Glacier. And the glacier is continuously moving and changing shape. So base camp is continuously moving and changing shape. This is the highest point for the most part that they're able to do helicopter rescues nowadays because the air is too thin above this point. So almost on a daily basis, we had helicopters coming in and out of base camp doing rescues. And of the 2 months we spent climbing Everest, about a month of it was spent right here at base camp for acclimatization reasons that I'll mention in a moment. Base camp is located within a horseshoe of mountains. So all day and night we see and hear these avalanches coming down towards the tents. They're quite interesting to watch. They make a sound like thunder. And luckily up until a few years ago, none of the avalanches had ever reached the tents at base camp. An avalanche at base camp. So this was the mess tent at base camp, which was provided by our outfitter. These are all the other climbers who used the same outfitter as we did, but we never actually climbed with any of these individuals, but we did eat and socialize with them while we were at base camp. The food at base camp was generally absolutely horrible. It's very difficult to bring any food in to that altitude. And so it generally consisted of Spam, sardines, sometimes some boiled vegetables or some yak meat they would chop off of a hanging yak. Very, very difficult to stomach. And to make things worse, the altitude causes you to lose your appetite. And so we would force down as much food as we could, but you can't eat enough to provide your body energy for the very long days. And each of us ended up losing between 20 and 30 pounds climbing Mount Everest. So forget about Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers and all the other diets out there. This is the best one. It's also not very sanitary though at base camp, or really anywhere on the mountain. And the altitude destroys your immune system while you're there. And so we all got these very bad sicknesses. And for 2 months, we basically bounced from sickness to sickness. One of the big safety concerns, especially at base camp and above, is the intense sun. There's not a lot of atmosphere to protect you from the sun. And all of us got these very bad burns. A few areas you would not normally think of, the reflection of the intense sun off of the snow and ice actually burns the inside of your nostrils and the roof of your mouth. So from base camp is where the real climbing begins. And it begins with what we see in the background here called the Khumbu Icefall. The icefall is created as the Western Khumbu Glacier above us, which is continuously moving, it breaks off between these two mountain peaks. And as it does so, it creates these enormous chunks of ice called seracs, which move at 4 to 6 feet per day. It's quite a dangerous section to go through. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of climbers killed from falling seracs or from ice avalanches. You might remember a few years ago there was an avalanche off of the shoulder of Everest that claimed the lives of 16 people near the top of the Khumbu Icefall. And to make things more difficult, at this altitude we have to change our acclimatization strategy. It's no longer enough just to go up slowly. So what we have to do from base camp, for example, is we go up to Camp 1, then we come back down to base camp for 3 or 4 days. Then we go up a little higher, come back down to base camp for 3 or 4 days. And this new acclimatization strategy caused us to have to go through the Khumbu Icefall 6 times. This is one of the areas really where risk management was so important. And we spent a huge amount of time in the 2 years of planning for this expedition in identifying these risks, trying to understand the risks, and developing risk response strategies and or risk mitigation strategies. And we had these types of risk mitigation strategies for a lot of the risks that we encountered on the mountain. The Khumbu Icefall is a good example. In the research we did, we determined that the majority of that movement of ice, the 4 to 6 feet per day, actually happens in the morning when the sun hits the ice and you get expansion of the ice. And so we adjusted our plan accordingly. We'd wake up at about 1 o'clock in the morning, try to get through the Khumbu Icefall all the way, or at least the majority of the way before the sun even hit the ice. And we had similar strategies for a lot of the other risks that we encountered. This is just a quick look at a risk breakdown structure. If we break it into technical, internal, external, and strategic risks. Again, I won't go through them all, but you can see the many different risks that we're dealing with. If we look at a typical risk matrix, we really didn't have the capacity to worry about risks that, should they be realized, the relative impact is going to be limited, minor, or even moderate. But for a lot of the risks that we're dealing with, should they be realized, the relative impact is going to be catastrophic. It's going to lead to loss of life. So for those risks where the impact is catastrophic, that's where we're focusing our risk mitigation strategies, so that we can reduce the relative likelihood to the point where we have a manageable risk in the end. So we're really doing qualitative risk assessment in this case. The beginning of the icefall is fairly tame, but as we move up into the Khumbu Icefall, you can begin to see these huge ice seracs. It really was quite a technical climb through the Khumbu Icefall as we navigated our way through these huge ice seracs. There were a lot of vertical ascents along the way, and in many places we would have to rappel down these vertical ice walls into the icefall below. And there were some fixed ropes throughout the icefall, but these can give you a bit of a false sense of security, because a number of times we put our weight against these ropes and the anchors would just pull right out of the ice. The intense sun heats up the anchors and they just don't hold firmly in the ice. But by far the most nerve-wracking part about the Khumbu Icefall is that there are about 50 of these very wide crevasses in the ice, which are hundreds and hundreds of feet deep, and we had to cross them on aluminum ladders held together by thin climbing rope. This is what you see when you look down into one of the smaller crevasses. As you see, they are virtually bottomless. And to make things worse, we're wearing crampons on the bottom of our mountaineering boots, which are a serrated spike for traction on snow and ice. But if you don't put your foot in the exact right spot on the ladder rungs, these serrated spikes actually lock onto the ladder rungs. And hovering above a seemingly bottomless crevasse, trying to yank your foot off of a ladder rung, is quite a unique experience. And some of these crevasses are very wide. This crevasse is about 35 to 40 feet across. In order to cross this crevasse, we have 4 aluminum ladders tied end to end. And when you cross with a heavy pack on your back, these ladders are creaking and swaying back and forth, and you really do take your life in your hands every time you cross. Some of the ladders were altogether terrifying, like this particular one. It's not uncommon because of the movement of ice in the Khumbu Icefall that pressure will build up and these crevasses can open or close quite suddenly. And I heard of at least one climber while we were there was crossing and the ladders just gave way beneath him, which is why you clip into these 2 loose safety ropes, which will save your life if that happens. Some of the ladders in the icefall are oriented vertically. There were 2 sections where we came across these vertical ice walls. In order to scale these walls, we had 5 aluminum ladders tied end to end. But if you look on these ladders on the right-hand side, they're really not much better than the horizontal ladders. They're haphazardly stacked end to end. It's just very difficult to maintain anything in the icefall because of the movement of ice. And this was the section near the top of the icefall. Quite a technical section. We had to climb up this vertical ice wall, cross on this narrow shoulder of ice before climbing another vertical ice wall and grabbing onto this ladder, which is hanging from above. So this is my sister Laura climbing in that particular section. And I have a short video showing you some of our experiences in the Khumbu Icefall. See the route up there? Pretty technical. As you can imagine, it is quite a relief every time you do get through the Khumbu Icefall. But we're not really out of the real danger zone yet, because now we're in what's known as the Western Khum, or the Valley of Silence, and although it doesn't have the same movement of ice as the Khumbu Icefall, it is just covered with these very wide crevasses, which we have to cross very carefully. Some of the crevasses in the Western Khum were in fact so wide that they couldn't be spanned by ladders, and we'd have to actually climb down into the crevasse and then out the other side, or sometimes we were able to cross on these narrow ribs of ice which connected the glacier. After about 10 to 12 hours of very difficult climbing through the icefall, we finally arrive at Camp 1 at about 19,000 vertical feet in elevation. Camp 1 is always very cold, very windy, and fairly dangerous. A few years before we were there was a large chunk of ice that broke off from way up high in this mountain on the left. It created an avalanche which swept right across this valley and wiped out all 60 tents. So you don't want to spend a lot of time at Camp 1. And the time you do spend there is spent in your tent melting ice and snow to create drinking water. To aid in the acclimatization process, we had to drink between 5 and 6 liters of water a day, so like 1.5 gallons of water, a huge amount of time spent melting ice and snow. This is actually the route from Camp 1 to Camp 2. If you look closely, you can see those tiny dots are actually other climbers. They put the route there to avoid these huge crevasses in the center of the Western Khum. After about 4 to 5 hours of climbing, though, from Camp 1, we finally arrive at Camp 2, 20,300 vertical feet. The tents at Camp 2 were erected right below these huge ice seracs, and I was a little bit concerned that one of these would break off and come towards the tents, although luckily this didn't happen while we were there. It can be quite a lonely and desolate place to spend a lot of time, especially during a snowstorm. And there was a makeshift dining tent erected at Camp 2 while we were there, but it was even more rustic than base camp, and the food was even worse. Almost every day we had what is known as delbat, which is rice and lentils. Very, very difficult to stomach at this altitude. A lot of sickness at and around Camp 2. A lot of climbers having to go back down to base camp to try and recover. My sister Laura got a very bad gastrointestinal sickness around Camp 2, and it was so bad it was actually causing her internal bleeding. So this is actually the route from above Camp 2. We continue up the Western Khum for about an hour before we finally arrive at this very steep icy face. It's a 6,000 vertical foot ice face known as the Lhotse Face, and Camp 3 is located halfway up the Lhotse Face. This is to try to show the steepness. It's about 60 degrees to the horizontal, but there are a number of vertical sections as well, which at this altitude were very, very difficult to scale because of this lack of available oxygen. One of the times we were climbing on the Lhotse Face, a storm came in from the backside of the mountain. And it was just incredible how fast the weather could change. Within a matter of minutes, it would go from, let's say, relatively warm because of the reflection of the sun off of all the white surfaces to extremely cold with almost zero visibility. We'd have to tighten the hoods of our jackets around so only our goggles were visible. Everest really creates its own weather. I wanted to talk for a minute about some of the mental strategies. I've studied the human mind for a lot of my life, and I got so interested in our minds in that when I was in high school in grade 10, I developed a very severe social phobia and anxiety disorder, which is known as generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. And it's a little ironic that I do what I do now, because anything that I thought could potentially result in public embarrassment, I would avoid that at all costs. But the problem with these avoidance strategies is that our minds flag those instances as threats, even though we haven't actually gone through them. And that begins to morph and expand and affect many different areas of our lives, as it did in my case. I could eventually hardly go outside without having these continual panic attacks and heart palpitations and a lot of really negative physiological effects from what I was going through. And that just continued getting worse and eventually morphed into depression. I went through a lot of years of just hating that part of me and living in my own mind more than anything. And luckily, after a number of years, I finally decided enough's enough. I'm going to do whatever it takes to figure this out. And that's really when I started studying the human mind and getting my hands on all the books that talked about what I was going through and trying to make those deeper cognitive changes. It became quite a passion of mine. I eventually went on to get my master's in psychology. But why I mention this is a lot of the strategies that I learned through that journey, I call that my internal Everest. In many ways, that was much more difficult than what I'm talking about today. But a lot of those strategies I applied on the mountain as well. For example, when it came to controlling my focus. There were many different times where it would take me 10 minutes to get from here to the other side of a room, and in terms of distance. And when you're moving that slowly, it just seems, the prospect of reaching the summit just seems unobtainable. And you can soon talk yourself into just giving up. And so I would play these mental games with myself. I would choose my own summit. It would be a chunk of rock or a piece of ice just about at the limit of what I could see, and that's all I'd allow myself to fill my mind with. Continue forcing myself to put one foot in front of the next till I reach that point. Then I'd allow myself to collapse on the ice for 2 minutes, and I'd time it before forcing myself to my feet and choosing another summit and doing that over and over again. And I had a lot of these types of mental strategies that I used on the mountain. After about 10 to 12 hours of very grueling climbing up that steep Lhotse face, we finally arrive at Camp 3, 23,600 vertical feet. The tents at Camp 3 were actually carved into the side of the Lhotse face because, as you can see, there's not much of a plateau here at all. And there are ropes connecting all the tents together. The entire time you're there, you need to make sure you're clipped into one of these ropes when traveling between the tents, because if you're not and you slip, you'll fall all the way down the Lhotse face, 3,000 vertical feet from here back towards Camp 2, and no one has ever survived a fall on the Lhotse face. So we made sure we were clipped in at all times. The first time we did climb to Camp 3, though, we had some incredible scenery. We're looking down at the clouds here. Beneath them would be Camp 2 and Base Camp. That's actually Mount Pumori poking up through the clouds, and behind it, Mount Choyoyu. This is my sister Laura on the left, my father in the middle, and myself on the right. My brother Adam wasn't with us the first time we climbed to Camp 3. He got a very bad sickness and had to return to base camp to try and recover. If you look at this photo, you can see we all have great big smiles on our faces. It looks like we're having a great old time. But I assure you it wasn't all fun and games. When I first arrived at Camp 3 and had rested in my tent, I had access to one of those finger medical sensors, the pulse oximeters that test for your vital signs. And my resting heart rate was 120 beats per minute, and my blood oxygen level was down to 67%. These low oxygen levels cause what's called Cheyne-Stokes respiration, which is similar to a type of sleep apnea, in that all night during the night we'd wake up, sit straight up in our tents, just gasping for breath. It was a very scary situation to go through, and none of us really got any sleep that first night at Camp 3. So I have another short video showing you some of the good times we had at Camp 3.
White, so it's hard to see. Hopefully we get some views in the morning. Here's Adam shortly after arriving at Camp 3. Doesn't he look like he's in fine shape and having the time of his life? So much fun. So this is our sanctuary. Got water going on that end. Camp 3. Going some water to drink. Yeah.
So this photo is actually from the second time we've climbed to Camp 3. That first time was just for acclimatization, then we went all the way back down to base camp. Now we've come all the way back up and we're actually starting our summit push from Camp 3. You can see in this photo we're wearing an oxygen mask. You do start oxygen that second time you climb to Camp 3, although it's a very small amount just to preserve your energy for higher up. From Camp 3 we continue up the Lhotse face for about an hour before we actually turn and traverse across the Lhotse face towards this yellowish band of rock, which is called the Yellow Band. This small incline at the beginning of the Yellow Band probably took each of us 10 minutes to scale. It's just extremely difficult to move your body at that altitude. Eventually, though, we did reach the top of the Yellow Band, and we were faced with this seemingly easy snowfield to cross. But it just took forever. Hour after hour, one foot in front of the next, until we finally arrived at this anvil-shaped chunk of rock you see on the left-hand side called the Geneva Spur, which was difficult for a few reasons. First of all, the intense wind had blown the majority of the snow off, exposing the rock. And the crampons we're wearing on our mountaineering boots work very well on snow and ice, but not on rock, the metallic spikes slip. The second difficulty was that no one ever takes down the old ropes. No one has the energy to do so at that altitude. And so you don't know if the rope you're holding on to is this year's rope or if it's been sitting there decaying in the sun for 10 years, in which case it'd be no good at all. And there was also a near vertical section at the top of the Geneva Spur, which was very, very difficult to scale. When we did reach the top of the Geneva Spur, though, we were greeted with some incredible scenery of the surrounding Himalayan mountains, and it was a fairly flat climb along the top of the Geneva Spur, which led us up to Camp 4. Camp 4 is the high camp. It's the last camp before the summit, also sometimes known as the South Col Camp, and it's in what's known as the Death Zone. The Death Zone is the area above 26,000 feet or 8,000 meters where there's not enough oxygen to support life. The entire time you're in the Death Zone, your body's just continuously degrading. And if you spend more than a few days there, you run the risk of not even having enough energy to go back down. Unfortunately, every year there are climbers that lose their lives at this altitude. The year we were there was no exception. There were 3 people that died while we were there. And at one point we even climbed past the body of a dead climber who had lost his life a few years earlier. This is one of our Sherpas. This is Zangbu, and Sherpas are they're local Nepalese climbers who are part of our team. We did have 2 Sherpas with us, so there were 6 of us in total at this point. I included the photo, though, just to show the wind. You can see this climbing team in the background just fighting with their tent. When we first started the expedition, our Sherpas were very reserved. And unfortunately, most climbers don't treat the Sherpas very well. But we thought early on, we have to find a way to integrate them into this team or none of us are going to be successful. And so we spent a lot of time trying to break down those barriers between us and them. When we'd invite them in to eat with us when we were eating, when we were playing cards, telling jokes, looking at risks, looking at our schedule, whatever we were doing, we incorporated them into that. And it was just incredible how our relationship with them changed. It wasn't us and them anymore. It was the 6 of us all working together to make this a reality for all of us. So we built a great relationship with our Sherpas. At this point, we're standing at Camp 4 looking up at Mount Everest. If we zoom in, you can actually see the route. It takes 6 hours to get from where we're standing up this very steep south face to this small plateau called the Balcony. Another 4 hours to get from the Balcony up this narrow ridge to what's known as the South Summit, and then another 2 hours to get from the South Summit to the actual summit of Everest. So it takes 12 hours in total one way. But the worst part is that you actually climb it at night. And this is really for 2 reasons. First of all, the weather is generally a little bit better at night, but also you want to arrive in the light of day. And so we had spent 8 hours climbing from Camp 3 to Camp 4. We arrived late in the evening. We have a few hours to melt some ice and snow, replenish our drinking water supplies before heading out again that night with no rest and no sleep on our 12-hour summit attempt. Unfortunately, the flash on our camera wasn't working in the extreme cold, so we don't have a lot of photos during the night, but it was a very cold and miserable climb up that steep south face, and it was a blizzard for most of the night. This is probably the time I would say where resilience was so important. We had to continue just picking ourselves back up and putting one foot in front of the next. At this point, as the sun is beginning to rise, we're actually above the Balcony and on our way towards the South Summit. And as the sun does rise, it brings with it some incredible scenery of the surrounding Himalayan mountains. This is a photo we took of the shadow of Mount Everest on the surrounding mountains. It was just really, really incredible. It is just like looking out of an airplane from that altitude. There were some near vertical sections though just before the south summit which were extremely difficult. At this point we are on hands and knees clawing ourselves forward inch by inch. We did reach the south summit. We're standing on the south summit here looking up at Mount Everest. We each left one spare oxygen cylinder here of the 3 oxygen cylinders we'd each brought before attempting this treacherous summit ridge, which you could call the Hillary Step section. The Hillary Step, named after Sir Edmund Hillary, is this last vertical rock climb on the summit ridge. So this is myself, my brother, and my father climbing on the summit ridge. The only other team up there that you see actually just ahead of us is a team supporting a 75-year-old gentleman from Japan who is breaking the world record for the oldest person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Very technical section, a lot of exposed rocks, our crampons are slipping. I still remember the feeling though. When I got to the top of the Hillary Step, I'm looking up that small frozen incline towards the summit of Mount Everest, and that's when I realized we're going to make it to the top of the world.
Here we are, the top of Mount Everest. There's Dad. Say hello, Dad.
So it was pretty incredible to be there. This is my father on the left, myself in the middle, my brother Adam on the right. I'll talk about my sister Laura in just a moment. But everywhere we look around us, 360 degrees, everything is below us. We took our oxygen masks off temporarily in order to take some photos at the summit, and it was just really, really incredible after almost 2 months of climbing to have finally reached our end goal. We only spent about 20 minutes at the summit though, really longer than we should have before starting to head down. And the way down is considered by most climbers to be even more dangerous than the way up. And it's really for 2 reasons. First of all, your body is completely exhausted, but also your mind is exhausted. We had been climbing at that point for well over 30 hours with no rest and no sleep, and our bodies and minds were beginning to shut down. Unfortunately, in this condition, it's very easy to make a mistake, and a lot of climbers have lost their lives on the way down for that reason. We had our 2 biggest scares on the way down. My biggest scare happened just after going down the Hillary Step when I actually ran out of oxygen. I realized this is what had happened. I collapsed on the ice, ripped off my mask, just gasping for breath. And almost immediately, because I've been exerting myself, my inner core went very cold. It's this weird type of cold, and my limbs started shaking uncontrollably. I knew this was a very bad place to have this happen because there's about a 2,000 vertical foot drop on both sides of that narrow summit ridge. I forced myself to my feet, tried to go a little bit further, but didn't make it very far at all before I collapsed again on the ice. And I turned to one of our Sherpas, Sange, and I said, I can't go on, I need oxygen. And luckily, I'm very thankful he decided to give me his oxygen cylinder. Because he lives in the area, he would be a little better off than I would be without the oxygen, although it's still very difficult for him. So I lay there on the ice, he went into my pack, switched our oxygen cylinders, and I asked him, turn my regulator right up to 3 liters per minute, which is very high. The maximum's actually 4. But I wanted these symptoms to go away. So he set the regulator, he said, okay, you're good, continue on down. I put my mask back on, started to continue down, but these symptoms just continued to get worse. Until the point that my limbs were shaking so violently that I couldn't even hold onto the rope. And that's when I really started to panic. I thought, I'm on oxygen. This is getting worse. I'm going to die up here. And it wasn't that crazy a thought to have because there's been almost 200 climbers lose their lives in that very same area, and most of them would have entered into the same situation that I'd entered into. I didn't make it very far at all before I came to where my father was, and he'd now run out of oxygen as well and was leaning up against this wall of ice. I stumbled up to him and I said, Dad, I think I have HACE, which is this cerebral edema I was telling you about earlier. And he had a steroid pill, which you can take to help out a little bit with this type of edema. But I said, before I take that steroid pill, go into my pack and turn my regulator right up to the maximum of 4 liters per minute. And I again collapsed on the ice. And I remember just how scared I was, because a rescue attempt from that altitude would just be a shot in the dark. I would be dead by the time they got me down to a safe altitude. Luckily, when my father went into my pack, though, he discovered that there was actually a problem with my regulator, which was preventing the oxygen from coming out at all. He was able to notice this problem, rectify the problem, get the oxygen back on, and these symptoms began to subside a little bit. But it was a terrifying situation to go through, as you can imagine. And my father had to go without oxygen as well for quite a while before we were able to get his one spare oxygen cylinder to him from the south summit, where we'd each left that one spare oxygen cylinder. It's still very technical and difficult going down that steep south face. We're looking at Camp 4 in the distance. This is actually the point where we pass by the body of the dead climber. And the danger is when you get back to your tent, you're so completely exhausted that you go into your tent and fall asleep immediately. It'd be very easy to do, but unfortunately some climbers that do this never wake up. You need to make sure you're on oxygen, you're on the proper amount of oxygen, your oxygen cylinder is not going to run out sometime during the night, and that you don't fall asleep with your arm outside of your sleeping bag, because the circulation is so poor at that altitude that climbers have woken up to a dead frozen arm and had to climb down in whatever position it was frozen in. So this is me holding my lifeline. One thing I didn't mention much about was my sister Laura. Laura had been with us that previous evening when we set out from Camp 4 towards the summit. She still had that very bad gastrointestinal sickness, which was causing her the internal bleeding. She had blood coming out both ends. And she didn't make it very far before she fell, and she called us on the radio and said, "I can't go on, I'm going back to Camp 4. And the three of us continued on. Well, she spent that next day at Camp 4 on oxygen, and I guess she realized she's never going to have another opportunity. She's one day away from the summit. And so when we got back down to Camp 4, she went up to my father and said, "Well, what do you think? Do you think I should give it another attempt?" And at first he thought she must have gone crazy, because after seeing the condition that we were in, we couldn't even get our own boots off. We were in a state of delirium. It just seemed crazy. But he said, "I want to leave it up to you. If you think you should, then you should." There are a few problems. Our Sherpas couldn't make another attempt. They were like us. We had to get down out of the death zone. But there's another Sherpa there with a lady from Singapore who Laura had become fairly good friends with at base camp. And this lady wasn't able to make it much past Camp 4 before she turned back and gave up. And so she decided to let her Sherpa make an attempt with Laura. And that night, at about 8 o'clock p.m., Laura headed out towards the summit, all by herself except for that one Sherpa. The next day we really had our biggest scare of the expedition, though, because we should have heard from Laura at about 8 o'clock the next morning. She leaves 8 o'clock the night before. It takes about 12 hours. We didn't hear from her. Soon it was 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. We're trying to reach them on the radios. Base camp can hear us trying to communicate. They're trying to reach them almost continuously. There's no response. Soon it's 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. At that point, we're getting very, very worried, because even if she'd had a minor fall, like a sprained ankle or something like that, she'd be running out of oxygen. And at that point, there's very little anyone can do for her. Even if we could have made another attempt, which in our physical condition wouldn't have been possible, it would have taken us over 10 hours to get up to where she was. So it was very scary, as you can imagine. And we didn't hear from Laura until well into the afternoon, when we finally got a call on the radio. So what did end up happening is Laura made it all the way to the summit by herself, except for the one Sherpa. She made us the first and only family of 4 in the world to reach the summit of Mount Everest. But she left her radio at Camp 4, and her Sherpa's radio had run out of batteries. So they weren't able to contact anyone until they got back down to base camp. As you can imagine, it was a huge relief to hear from her, and my father said she'd get a big hug when she got back down to base camp, and that's exactly what she got. The last thing I want to talk about is empowering team members. And the dialogue between my father and sister, I would say it was a bit of a controversial one. I'm referring to when my sister asked my father what he thought of her making another attempt. You know, how could he allow her to make another attempt? And I have 3 kids of my own. I think something like this would be very difficult and perhaps foolish in some ways. But I can see the other side of the coin. Had my father prevented her from making her own decision, she could easily have lifelong animosity about that. And that's what happens in a lot of team environments if we're continuously disempowering others. Before we know it, I mean, good people, they'll just leave the team or leave the organization because they're not being developed. And most of the time, the reason why we're not empowering others is our own fear. We don't want a mistake someone else makes to look bad on us. And so we take on way too much ourselves. But it's important if we want to actually, if we want to develop the team. I wanted to share this this graph, which is really my view on the relationship between productivity and creativity and processes and procedures, the amount of structure we have. In any given team or organization where we have very little structure, very few processes and procedures, we just end up having chaos. Because every new idea, someone runs with it in a different direction, and you have very little alignment. And consequently, the productivity and creativity is extremely low. But we have a parabolic relationship in that it's equally as detrimental, if not worse, if we're too far on the right-hand side of this graph, where there's so much structure in place that everyone's hands are tied. A lot of organizations have went bankrupt for being too far on the right-hand side of this graph. The problem is you're not able to innovate when you're over there because we've always done it this way. We're just going to continue doing it this way. And when society changes, when people's needs change, you're not able to change. And so that's why you want to try to find the sweet spot where you have, and you float back and forth, but where you have enough structure in place so that you've achieved that alignment. Everyone's moving in the same direction, but you haven't stifled the innovation and creativity. And that's where you reach the sweet spot where you've maximized your productivity and creativity or optimized it. It really was a huge relief when we're all safely back at base camp. And at this point, all we wanted to do was to get off that mountain. And that's exactly what we did, is we headed out just as quickly as we could. The trek out from base camp, though, was actually quite interesting because we had just spent 2 months in Nepal, and Nepal was going into summertime. And so the Khumbu Valley had come alive with these flowering trees and a lot of really interesting wildlife along the way. But the best part was that we had just spent 2 months building up red blood cells. And we had a ton of red blood cells in our bodies. We had done what you could call natural blood doping. You've heard of blood doping in the Olympics. It's illegal, but athletes will take blood out of their bodies, allow their bodies to build red blood cells, then put the blood back in to artificially increase their red blood cell count. We had done this completely naturally to the extreme, and we had a huge number of red blood cells in our bodies. And as we're heading down into an oxygen-rich environment, we just felt like superhumans. We could charge along that trail at full speed, day or night, and our hearts were barely even beating. It was just like a resting heart rate. An incredible feeling and situation to go through. When we did get back down to Lukla, though, we took the first flight we could out of Lukla, back to Kathmandu. We signed into the hotel, went to the biggest buffet we could find, and after 2 months of a very difficult expedition, we were finally able to relax. So Edmund Hillary once said, "It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." And looking back at our journey on Mount Everest, I think this is a very true quote. It's as much of a mental challenge as anything else. And this is the real reason why, of the climbers that attempt Everest every year, it's only about 29% that are successful. Over 70% of the climbers, when we were there, turned back. And we had some real advantages being a family on the mountain. The first was we'd already built the trust. But also we knew how to overcome a lot of these conflicts and interpersonal challenges that just tore apart the majority of the other teams. And perhaps most importantly, we really looked out for each other that much more than a random climber that would join an expedition in order to make an attempt on Mount Everest. As with most things in life, it's a lot easier to turn back than to work through the challenges ahead. And the biggest challenge of Everest is the integration of everything I just talked about. Just the biological challenges on their own, which I didn't go into graphic detail about, but they were horrible. And you combine that with the altitude challenges and the acclimatization and the physical and mental and emotional and structural and interpersonal challenges, that's when it becomes almost impossible. The message I want to leave you with, though, is not to go climb Everest. I don't recommend this to any of my friends. But we all have our own Everests in life, or in our work, or in our business, or in our company, or whatever it is, or in our family. And this is the same passion and commitment and planning and resilience and everything that's involved in making that a reality. So the only question is, what is your Everest? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Do find your own Everest and continue climbing it. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can see my contact detail, alan@alanmallory.com. It's a pleasure sharing this with you.
Thank you, Alan, for sharing your story. Pretty amazing feat. But I'll be honest, I'm still not planning on making the climb. I would like to congratulate all of the safest companies and thank everyone that helped make today happen. I would also like to thank our corporate sponsors for your support and helping us make our mission a reality. Last but not least, I would like to remind everyone that this 37th Annual Safety and Health Summit will be held on Tuesday, November 3rd this year. This event will be held virtually, and I am happy to say that we have a great platform for our exhibitors and an agenda packed with great speakers. Thank you again for attending our celebration of safety. This concludes our program. Stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you in November.